I thought I knew the woman who raised me. I was wrong. Aunt Margaret had been my guardian since I was 3, my rock, my everything. But at 72, sitting in that lawyer's office 3 days after her funeral, I discovered that everything I believed about my life was a lie. And what I discovered that day didn't just change me. It changed the way I raised my children, the way I see love, and the way I understand sacrifice itself. The envelope in my hands was thick, yellowed with age, and marked in Margaret's careful handwriting. For Eleanor, the truth about why you're here. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal that had been waiting 43 years to be opened. What I found inside didn't just change my understanding of the past. It shattered every assumption I'd ever made about love, sacrifice, and the price some people pay to give others a chance at life. The rain drummed against the church windows as I sat in the front pew, watching them lower Aunt Margaret into the ground. She'd been everything to me: mother, father, best friend, and guardian angel, all rolled into one fierce 5'2" package. I thought I was prepared for this moment, but grief has a way of making you feel like you're drowning in broad daylight. What I wasn't prepared for was the elderly woman who approached me after the service. She had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that seemed to carry decades of secrets. "Eleanor," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "Your aunt. She finally gets to rest now. The burden she carried for you. It was heavier than anyone should bear." I stared at her, confusion mixing with my grief. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" She smiled sadly, patting my hand with fingers that felt paper-thin. "I'm Dorothy Walsh. I knew your aunt before you came to live with her, before she gave up everything to make sure you had a chance." Before I could ask what she meant, Dorothy pressed a small piece of paper into my palm. "When you're ready for the truth, call me. Margaret made me promise to tell you everything if something happened to her." She squeezed my hand once more, then disappeared into the crowd of mourners. Standing there in the rain, I looked down at the paper in my hand. On it was a phone number and 4 words that would haunt me for days. "Ask about the sacrifice." 3 days later, I sat across from Mr. Harrison, Margaret's lawyer, expecting to hear about a modest inheritance and maybe some family jewelry. Instead, he slid a thick manila envelope across his mahogany desk, along with a small brass key that looked like it belonged to a safety deposit box. "Your aunt left specific instructions," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been keeping secrets for decades. "This envelope contains a letter she wrote to you 20 years ago, updated just last month. She made me promise it would only be given to you after her death." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "And this key opens box 247 at First National Bank. And before I open that envelope, I just want to say, if stories like this resonate with you, if you've ever had someone whose love changed your life, please consider subscribing. These stories matter, and I promise there's more coming." I turned the envelope over in my hands and my heart nearly stopped. In Margaret's familiar handwriting were the words, "Eleanor, the real reason you're my daughter. Not niece, not ward. Daughter." My hand started shaking as I realized that even the most basic facts about my life might have been carefully constructed lies. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression gentle but serious. "Eleanor, your aunt came to see me 6 months ago. She said she was dying and couldn't take the truth to her grave. She said you deserved to know why she never married, why she lived in that small apartment instead of the house she owned, and why she used to cry every March 15th. Reading Margaret's words, I realized how many lives can be shaped by a single silent sacrifice. And if stories like this echo something in your own life, I'd be honored to have you here. Subscribe and stay with me. There's more to uncover. I waited until I was alone in my car before opening that envelope. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost tore the letter. Margaret's handwriting, usually so steady and sure, seemed to waver on the page, as if she'd been crying while writing it. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll finally be free from the lie I've been living for 43 years. You are not my brother's daughter. You are not my niece. You are the daughter I chose to save, even when it cost me everything I'd ever dreamed of having." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had to read that paragraph 3 times before it sank in. Margaret continued, "In March of 1980, I was 29 years old and 3 months away from marrying the love of my life, James Morrison. We had the church booked, the dress bought, and a little house picked out on Maple Street. I thought I had my whole life figured out. Then your mother, Sarah, came to me. She was 17, pregnant, and her parents had thrown her out. She was living in her car, eating once a day. And the baby, you, were in danger. The doctor said she needed immediate medical care, proper nutrition, and a safe place to stay, or both of you might die. I had to stop reading. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't breathe. Everything I'd ever believed about myself, about my family, about my place in the world, was crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. The letter went on, so I made a choice. I used my wedding fund for Sarah's medical bills. I sold my engagement ring to pay for the apartment where you were born, and I told James that I couldn't marry him because I had to take care of my niece. I never told him the truth. I never told anyone the truth, because some secrets are too big to share, and some lies are told out of love. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank, with Margaret's key clutched in my sweaty palm. The bank manager, a woman about my age with kind eyes, led me to the vault. "Box 247, she said softly. "Your aunt visited this box every year on your birthday. She'd stay down here for hours sometimes, just sitting and looking through whatever was inside. When she opened the box, I gasped. It was packed with documents, photographs, letters, and small mementos that told the story of a life I'd never known existed. On top was a faded photograph of a young woman who looked like me, holding a baby. On the back, in Margaret's handwriting, Sarah holding Eleanor, aged 3 weeks. She was beautiful, just like her daughter. Underneath were hospital records, adoption papers that were never filed, and a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon. The return address on every envelope made my heart stop. James Morrison, the man who would have been Margaret's husband, the man whose life she'd given up to save mine. I opened the first letter with trembling fingers. It was dated March 20th, 1980, just days after I was born. "My dearest Margaret," it read, "I don't understand why you're doing this. I love you. I love you enough to love your niece, too. Please don't push me away. Please don't throw away what we have. I'll wait for you. I'll wait as long as it takes." But there were more letters, dozens of them, spanning months, then years, each one more desperate than the last, begging Margaret to reconsider, to let him help, to trust him with whatever burden she was carrying. The final letter was dated December of 1983, and it was just 4 words, "I'll always love you." Tucked behind the letters was something that made me sob right there in the bank vault. A small velvet box containing an engagement ring that had never been worn, and a wedding dress receipt for a size 6 dress that was never picked up. I spent the next week going through every document in that box, and what I discovered painted a picture of sacrifice so profound it took my breath away. Margaret hadn't just given up her wedding. She'd given up her entire future, piece by piece, to make sure I had one. The bank records showed that she'd had over $12,000 saved for her honeymoon and their first house. Every penny went to prenatal care for my biological mother, Sarah. The property deed revealed that Margaret had owned a beautiful 3-bedroom house on Oak Street, the same house she'd planned to share with James. She sold it and moved into a tiny apartment so she could afford to hire a live-in nurse for Sarah during the difficult pregnancy. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a journal Margaret had kept during those months. Her entries revealed the agony of her decision. March 18th, James came by again today. He begged me to tell him what's wrong. I wanted to tell him everything, but if I do, Sarah might lose her baby. I can't risk Eleanor's life for my own happiness. April 2nd, Sarah's blood pressure is dangerously high. Dr. Rodriguez says she needs complete bed rest and monitoring. I told James I needed space to think about our relationship. The lie burned like acid in my throat. but Eleanor has to come first. May 15th. Eleanor was born today. She's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and the strongest cry I've ever heard. Sarah held her for exactly 3 minutes before she asked me to take her. "I'm 17, she whispered. "I can't give her the life she deserves, but you can. I'm not sure I can either, but I'm going to try." The final entry was dated June 1st, 1980. James got married today. I saw the announcement in the paper. I'm happy for him. I'm also heartbroken, but Eleanor smiled at me for the first time yesterday, and I know I made the right choice. Some dreams are worth sacrificing for love. I found James Morrison living in a retirement community, about an hour from my house. When I called and told him who I was, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, "Eleanor, Margaret's Eleanor." I wondered if this day would ever come. He was 81 now, a widower with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly when he poured tea. We sat in his small living room, surrounded by photos of the family he'd built after Margaret broke his heart. "I never stopped loving her," he said quietly, "but I also never understood why she pushed me away. I thought maybe she didn't love me enough to fight for us. She loved you enough to let you go," I said, my voice breaking. "She loved you enough to sacrifice her own happiness so you could have a life with someone who could put you first." I told him everything, about Sarah, about the pregnancy, about the medical bills and the sold house and the years of silence that followed. James listened with tears streaming down his face. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he stood up and walked to an old wooden desk in the corner. He pulled out a small box and handed it to me. "I kept this for 63 years, he said. "I always hoped that someday, somehow, I'd be able to give it to her." Inside the box was a simple gold locket. When I opened it, I saw a tiny photo of Margaret as a young woman, smiling and radiant. "I bought this for her 29th birthday, James whispered. "The birthday that came and went without a celebration because she was too busy taking care of you." I found myself wondering what might have happened if Margaret had chosen differently. But it was clear. Some decisions echo through decades, touching lives in ways we never imagine. As I drove home from James's house, I couldn't stop thinking about the ripple effects of Margaret's decision. If she hadn't sacrificed her wedding fund, I might not have survived those crucial early weeks. If she hadn't sold her house, Sarah might not have had the medical care she needed. If she hadn't chosen duty over love, I wouldn't exist. But it went deeper than that, because Margaret raised me. I grew up believing that love meant putting others first. I became a teacher, dedicating my life to helping children who needed extra support. I married a man who understood that some things were more important than personal ambition. I raised 3 children who learned that family meant sacrifice, loyalty, and unconditional love. And it didn't stop there. My daughter Emma became a pediatric nurse, inspired by the stories Margaret told her about helping babies and mothers in need. My son Michael started a scholarship fund for teenage mothers trying to finish school. My youngest, Sarah, named after my biological mother, became a social worker specializing in crisis intervention for pregnant teens. 3 generations of lives shaped by one woman's choice to love without condition, to sacrifice without recognition, to give without expectation. I wondered how many other families had been touched by Margaret's quiet heroism. How many lives had been saved by her decision to put love above personal happiness. Sitting in my driveway, I realized that Margaret's sacrifice hadn't just given me life. It had given me a blueprint for how to live. Every act of kindness I'd ever performed, every moment I'd chosen others over myself, every time I'd loved without counting the cost, had been a continuation of the choice she made in 1980. The next piece of the puzzle was finding Sarah, my biological mother. Margaret's records showed that she'd moved to California shortly after I was born, but the trail went cold after that. I hired a private investigator, and after 2 weeks of searching, he found her living in Sacramento, working as a nurse's aide in a retirement home. When I called, Sarah's voice was shaky. "Eleanor? Oh my God, Eleanor. I've wondered about you every day for 43 years. I hoped you'd grown up happy. I hoped Margaret was able to give you everything I couldn't." She agreed to meet me, and I flew to California the next week. Sarah was 60 now, with graying hair and tired eyes that lit up when she saw me. "You look just like I did at your age," she said, reaching out to touch my face with trembling fingers. "I've carried so much guilt, Eleanor. I've wondered if I made the right choice, if I was selfish to give you away." "You weren't selfish," I said, taking her hands. "You were 17 and alone. You made sure I had a chance at life, even when it meant giving up your own chance to be my mother." We talked for hours, and I learned that Sarah had never married, never had other children. She'd devoted her life to caring for elderly patients, as if she was trying to atone for the child she couldn't raise. "I named you Eleanor," she said softly, "after Eleanor Roosevelt. I wanted you to have a strong name, a name that meant something. I told Margaret that was the one thing I wanted to give you myself." She pulled out a worn photograph from her purse. It was the same picture I'd found in the safety deposit box. Sarah holding me as a newborn. "I only held you for 3 minutes," she whispered, "but I memorized every detail of your face. I told you I loved you, and I promised you that someday, when you were old enough to understand, you'd know that giving you away was the hardest thing I'd ever done." Through Sarah, I learned the final pieces of the story. She'd been in foster care since she was 14, aging out of the system with no family support and no resources. When she found out she was pregnant, she'd tried to handle it on her own. But by her 7th month, she was malnourished and desperate. "I was sleeping in my car," Sarah told me, her voice breaking. "I'd sold everything I owned except the clothes on my back. I was eating 1 meal a day, and I could feel you getting weaker inside me. I was so scared you were going to die because I couldn't take care of you." She'd heard about Margaret through a social worker who knew Margaret volunteered at the women's shelter. The social worker said Margaret was different from other people who wanted to help. She said Margaret didn't just give money or food. She gave her time, her heart, her whole self to people who needed her. When Sarah met Margaret, she was struck by how young she was, how much life she still had ahead of her. "She was engaged to be married," Sarah said. "She showed me the ring, told me about the wedding plans. She was so happy, so full of hope for the future. I felt terrible asking her to help me, but I didn't have anywhere else to turn." "But Margaret didn't hesitate," Sarah continued. "She looked at me, looked at my belly where you were growing, and said, 'We'll figure this out together.' She never once made me feel like a burden or a problem to be solved. She made me feel like I was doing something brave by asking for help." Sarah pulled out a letter from her purse, another piece of the puzzle I'd never seen. It was from Margaret, written a year after I was born. "She sent me updates," Sarah said. "Pictures, little stories about your milestones. She wanted me to know you were thriving, that I'd made the right choice. She wrote to me for 10 years, until I moved and lost touch." The letter was dated March 1981. "Eleanor took her first steps today. She's fearless, just like her mother. She climbs everything, explores everything, and laughs at everything. You gave me the greatest gift of my life, Sarah. Thank you for trusting me with her." Sitting in that retirement home cafeteria with Sarah, I realized that Margaret's sacrifice had created something much bigger than just my life. It had created a legacy of love that continued to multiply across generations. Sarah had dedicated her life to caring for others because she understood what it meant to need help and receive it unconditionally. "After I gave you to Margaret," Sarah said, "I promised myself I'd spend my life giving back. I couldn't be your mother, but I could be a mother figure to other people who needed care. I've worked with elderly patients for 25 years, and every time I hold someone's hand or comfort someone who's scared, I think about Margaret. I think about how she held my hand when I was terrified and alone. I told Sarah about my own children, about how they'd all chosen careers in service to others, how Emma saved babies in the NICU, how Michael helped teenage mothers finish school, how Sarah worked with families in crisis. Margaret's choice didn't just save my life," I said. "It created a ripple effect of love that's still spreading." Sarah smiled through her tears. "She would have been so proud of you, Eleanor. She would have been proud of all of us." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I want you to know something. I never regretted giving you away, but I always regretted not being able to thank Margaret properly. She gave me the gift of knowing my daughter would be loved, would be safe, would have opportunities I couldn't provide. As we prepared to say goodbye, Sarah handed me one more thing. A small wooden box. "I've been saving this for you," she said. "It's not much, but it's everything I had to give." Inside was a tiny baby bracelet with Eleanor spelled out in letter beads, and a note written in a teenager's handwriting. "For my daughter, who deserves the world. Love always, Mom." I held that bracelet in my hands, thinking about how many people had loved me before I was even old enough to understand what love meant. Margaret, who sacrificed everything. Sarah, who gave me away to save my life. James, who kept a locket for 63 years. And now, my own family, carrying that love forward into the next generation. The story that began with a teenage girl's desperate choice had become a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to create families, to build legacies that last long after the original sacrifice is forgotten. Margaret's quiet heroism had rippled through time, touching more lives than she could have ever imagined. I'm 73 years old now, and I finally understand what Margaret meant when she used to say, "Some gifts are too precious to acknowledge." She never wanted credit for saving my life because she knew that love, real love, doesn't keep score. It just gives and gives and gives until the giving becomes its own reward. Last week I went to Margaret's grave for the first time since her funeral. I brought the locket James had kept for 63 years, the baby bracelet Sarah had saved, and a letter I'd written to her, a letter of gratitude that was 43 years overdue. I told her about meeting James, about finding Sarah, about understanding the full scope of her sacrifice. I told her about my children and grandchildren, about the lives that existed because she'd chosen love over personal happiness. You were never just my aunt. You were my mother, in every way that ever mattered. As I walked away from her grave, I realized that Margaret's story wasn't really about sacrifice at all. It was about the incredible power of love to create life, to build families, to transform strangers into mothers and daughters and aunts and nieces. It was about how one woman's choice to love without condition had created a legacy that would continue long after all of us were gone. Some secrets are too heavy to carry, but the kind of love Margaret gave me, it carries through generations. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it. Leave a comment about someone who loved you unconditionally, someone whose quiet sacrifice changed your life. I'd love to read your story. And if you'd like to hear more true stories like this one, about love, legacy, and the quiet heroes among us, please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. These stories matter, and they're meant to be shared.